Do you ever feel cracking, clicking, popping, or snapping at your wrist and hand, especially when you're rotating your wrist from palm up to palm down? If you've ever wondered what that noise was or what's causing it, today I'm gonna let you know using some science, but most importantly, give you specific exercises you can try to get relief quickly. I'm a physical therapist who has specialized in treating wrist and hand injuries for the past decade. From professional gamers to engineers, analysts, musicians, and crafters, I've been featured on ESPN, Washington Post, I've published research, and have helped more than 2,500 plus individuals fix their wrist pain. So let's get started. There are a few reasons why the snapping, cracking, and popping can occur. One is local swelling of the tendon sheath, which is the protective covering of our tendons. This is the most common, and I'll get to this soon, but I wanted to go over some of the other reasons as well. Number two is gas being released from the joints of the wrist and hand. And this typically occurs when you're bending your wrist or moving your wrist pretty quickly, which causes the gas to be released from that joint and cause that audible popping sound. This can lead to a temporary reduction in pain locally, and is present in some cases, but it really is nothing to worry about, especially if you have no pain associated with the popping. Number three is more rare, but with increased stiffness of the tendons, they may roll over certain parts of the bone or rub against each other within the compartments. And in some cases, the tendon can partially dislocate, but again, it's quite rare, especially in repetitive strain injuries. And the underlying problem in most cases is still the same: poor overall capacity of the muscle and tendon. So let's get back to that most common reason, which is tendon swelling. We call this paratendon involvement or involvement of the sheath that surrounds the tendon. The purpose of this lining is to help the tendon slide smoothly as the muscle contracts. And when there's irritation and there's some swelling of the tendon, it can create some stickiness or adhesions between the layers here. And as they break, when there's some of that sliding, that cracking sound is being created. And so you really have nothing to worry about with this, but it is a sign that there could be some tendon irritation from poor endurance of muscles. And this is why with certain exercises you can strengthen these tendons so they don't swell and lead to that cracking, clicking, and popping you might feel. Self-massage techniques can be helpful to provide some temporary relief for the muscles and tendons involved. And it's mainly a tool to reduce overall sensitivity, but also reduce some of the tightness of the muscles at rest. And this can sometimes allow more smooth movement within the sheath. You can use a tennis ball, your own arm, or even a massage gun if you have one. Spend time moving along the muscle and the tendons for around 30 seconds and repeat for a few sets. And now for the actual strengthening or endurance-based exercises. We typically recommend the use of a light dumbbell between 3 to 5% of your body weight. And most popping occurs at one of these four regions. So we'll go over the specific exercises you can do for each of those regions. Number one is palm side of the wrist. When you feel it on the palm side of the wrist, it typically involves the flexor tendons. And these are responsible for bending your wrist down and moving your fingers down to click the keys or mouse buttons. Using the dumbbell, you can perform wrist flexion exercises. For most RSI issues or pain with repetitive use, we want to focus on building up the endurance of our muscles and tendons' capacity to handle repeated stress. So that means being able to perform higher overall repetitions, starting around 12 reps and then building up to around 25 for 3 sets. The idea is that you use an exercise to target the muscle, but how you perform the exercise, high repetitions with a metronome, allows you to build endurance but also improve signaling between the brain and the muscle. The next region is the thumb side of the wrist. When you feel it on the thumb side of your wrist, it typically involves the radial deviators and thumb muscles. And these are responsible for moving your thumb like this away from your hand and bending your wrist towards that thumb in radial deviation. So using the dumbbell, you can perform wrist radial deviation exercises. Again, you're going to be performing higher overall repetitions starting at 12 reps, then trying to hit or target 25 reps for 3 sets. Next, we have ulnar deviation. When you feel it on the pinky side of your wrist, that typically involves the ulnar deviators. And these are responsible for moving your wrist towards your pinky. There's an extensor and flexor-sided ulnar deviator. This is a really commonly irritated muscle in gamers and desk workers, mainly because of a lot of the mouse use flicking to the right or moving left and right very frequently, and the lower amount of endurance-based fibers at the ulnar deviators. So again, you can use a dumbbell to perform wrist radial ulnar deviation along with other potential tools like a broom or umbrella. And lastly, we have the top side of the wrist. When you feel it on the top side of your wrist, it typically involves the extensors. And so these are responsible for bending your wrist up and your fingers up when your palm is facing down. And this is a really commonly irritated muscle also in gamers and desk workers because you have to lift off your finger from the mouse or lift off your fingers from the keyboard and when you're pressing a lot of keys. And again, you can use the dumbbell to perform endurance-based protocols for wrist extension. And as a bonus exercise to improve overall coordination, you can do something called a controlled articular rotation. This helps us improve our overall coordination and strengthens the wrist in all angles of motion and control, working on a majority of all of these muscles. This is absolutely a more difficult exercise. You can do it without weight and then progress to doing it with weight. And if you enjoyed this video, then click the next video because this is where Elliot describes the science behind repetitive strain injuries and how you can actually solve your wrist pain without resting, bracing, or medication.